Good evening, gentlemen. Tonight we're going to be looking at the events leading up to and during the early stages of the revolution. Now, every revolution shares the same 5 stages. Here is the chart depicting those stages. On the left, you have the old regime losing legitimacy, the fall of the old regime, the moderates taking control, the reign of terror, and the rise of dictatorships. Now, as we go through this presentation and then also the revolution as a whole, I want you to try and keep note on how the American Revolution fit these stages. First, we must begin with the motivations behind the revolution and some theories on the motivations. Schoolhouse Rock was a great Saturday morning cartoon highlighting events and topics in American history. Their depiction of the start of the revolution in Shot Heard Around the World was that the heavy taxes were the catalyst for the American Revolution. Although it is true to a point, the actual catalysts for the revolution were not just the taxes. Mainly, they came from the aftermath of the French and Indian War. First, with the proclamation line following the French and Indian War, it established the western border along the Appalachian mountain range. It said that English colonists could not move past that line, even though there were colonists that did move past that line prior to the establishment of the proclamation line. This really hindered westward expansion, and many new colonists wanted to move west to have that land, to call it their own, for the betterment of themselves and their families. But at the same time, that's what caused the French and Indian War. So the English establishing the proclamation line, they didn't want to have another conflict between natives, and they also reinforced the Navigation Acts. As you can see, the Navigation Acts, there were several, starting from 1651, but it wasn't until following the French and Indian War that you had the reinforcement, and this really hindered the free trade and the very profitable trade along the triangular trade route, as depicted on the right. Many men made a very good living off of this triangular trade, but because of the Navigation Acts and the reinforcement of these Navigation Acts, that was no longer allowed, and that cut into the wealth of many prominent colonists, like John Hancock. You also had the implementation of new acts and taxes. These taxes were levied to pay for the war debt and the stationing of the soldiers in the colonies for the colonists' protection. The famous phrase, "taxation without representation is tyranny," was said by James Otis Jr., a Boston lawyer, during a town meeting over the Sugar Acts. This becomes the rally cry for the protest against these new taxes and acts, but this is not all completely true, because the colonies did have representation in Parliament. It was King George himself, which is why he comes under a lot of scrutiny. And although these taxes were actually less than what the colonists paid originally, and made the goods more affordable, many, again, prominent members of the American colonial society did not agree with these new taxes, and again, because it cut into their profits, because they could charge a lot more. Boston becomes a hotbed and the epicenter for the tension between colonists and British government. The Sons of Liberty take the lead in the way that with anti-British propaganda and protests. None more prominent than the Bloody Massacre engraving produced by Paul Revere, which is there on the left. This was mass-produced and distributed throughout the colonies, depicting the British as savages. And then coupled with the Boston Tea Party, which occurred 3 years later, caused Parliament to implement what are called the coercive acts. These coercive acts caused many to want to speak out against the British. So representatives from all of the colonies except for Georgia met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to discuss whether the colonies would remain loyal or take action to separate from the British Crown. There were two options that were laid out. The first was called the Galloway Plan. The Galloway Plan was that olive branch petition that asked for forgiveness from the Crown, but at the same time said that they would be loyal, and if the king would just eliminate those restrictions that were placed on not only Boston but also the acts that were implemented earlier that had not been pulled off. They also had what was called the Suffolk Resolve. Now the Suffolk Resolve was proposed by Paul Revere, so you can only guess what he wanted. Paul Revere asked that these acts were intolerable and that the colonists should separate from the English crown because the king was acting as a tyrant. Now, the debate went on for several weeks on what to do, but during this First Continental Congress, you had these shots fired in Lexington and Concord, which end up becoming the first shots of the American Revolution, and this now forces the hand of the Continental Congress, and they now need to figure out what to do now that violence has broken out. We will pick up with this later, and we will also go in depth into many of the topics that we covered today, but for a review, these are the terms to know. Please be prepared to discuss these and know what these are so when they come up in class. I'll see you later.